The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, residents of Easton. This is Bill Ames, the co-producer, co-talent, co-interviewer of the Film Connection, your favorite film show in Easton. And we're very pleased to have an interesting guest this day, as always. And I'd like to introduce my co-host here, Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, who is also the person who makes this whole show happen. So here's to you, Priscilla. So,
Thank you, Billy.
the Film Connection began back in the early 2000s, right, Priscilla? When you were just a kid.
Oh, yeah, right. And we were skating on Shovel Shop Pond.
Because at that point, as we'll get into later in the show, we had started the Hockomock Film Festival, which is really just a competition, which still goes to this day, thanks to Kim Pincus, who is the head of the ECAT studios. And we started the film club, which thanks to Ed Hands, still goes to this day at Queesit House every other Friday night through winter, fall, and spring. So we're very proud of that.
It's great.
We have an big alumni association and all this sort of thing. So Priscilla, where should we start this interview?
Well, I think we should start by introducing our guest, Ron Leone, who is Dr. Ron Leone, who is a professor of media at Stonehill College. And welcome to the show, Ron.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thanks, Bill. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure. I got to know Ron back in the early days of the Hockomock Film Competition.
Oh.
Ron was one of the judges. That was one of his contributions. We did several of these shows too, right, Ron?
We did. I mean, at least a few. I don't know if
I
was definitely involved a little bit. Sure.
Yeah, we were trying to get it off the ground. So, but Ron couldn't have been greater cooperation. He was writing his PhD thesis, and he had certainly had plenty to do. But he was always had a little bit of time for us, so we sure appreciated that. And
well, this is old homecoming week for you.
Yeah, we haven't seen each other probably in 15 years, right?
I think so.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. How did it start? Where'd you grow up, and what were the influences that led you on the path to becoming a doctor, getting your doctorate in communication?
I owe it to a great public education at Rhode Island College, and a lot of the instructors, the professors I had there, who kind of tweaked something for me, and love of lifelong learning and being an educator. But it took a long time for me to get from an undergraduate at Rhode Island College to ultimately teaching at Stonehill. That was about a 10-year journey. And I originally worked in TV production. I worked at Channel 10 in Providence, Channel 4 in Boston, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And something just kept drawing me back to this life, the contributions I could make in my role as professor. And then I had to just make that decision. Okay, I'm going to go to school for 7 more years, get a master's, get a PhD, and do it. It was a big leap, and it was.
Well, you're very happy and content, and you, I assume. So, where did you grow up in?
I grew up in Providence, in the north end of Providence. It was a largely Italian section, maybe exclusively, I'm sure, for the days before I came around. And I had a experience there. I didn't journey out very far, even to go to Rhode Island College, also in Providence. It wasn't until later that I branched out a bit, went to Boston University, and then to Syracuse.
Yeah. So, what was your childhood like? Were there any influences that kind of hinted at what you might do later in life?
There was very little in this context, in terms of film or movies, other than my being film fans. My father was a musician, That was his kind of one of his second job or his first, depending on what day you talk to him. And he did that for my entire life. He played up until his late 70s, and then passed away a few years later. So it was so music was around, but I think film was seen as just as entertainment, just as diversionary. But something I walked into a film class, like the kinds of things I teach now at 19 years old maybe, and I was like, wow, so wait a minute, there's way more to this than I ever gave it credibility. There's way more to motion pictures as art, as cultural artifact, as reflection of society. Those are all things that, as a casual viewer, which is all I had been up until that point, never really struck a chord for me.
Well, that was your lucky day.
It was, and then I couldn't take enough of I took as many of those classes as possible before graduating, and I had, like I said, I was very fortunate. Rhode Island College, through their English department, had, I want to say, 6 people on staff who were, with PhDs who taught film, taught cinema studies, or back then it was film studies. And I tried to be in their class, every one of their classes, everything that they offered, as much as I could, and while I was still doing my own major and stuff.
Well, tell us about some of the films you made back then. Any memorable ones?
Made?
That you were part of the creation of, or?
I mean, I made a video. I was involved with the making of a video as a student, as an undergraduate, in that ultimately made it onto community access television. I mean, this is when we were shooting with tape on tape, 1/2-inch tape, and editing, on VHS essentially, and then being bumped up so that it could be broadcast on local access. But again, that became something I enjoyed doing. It was fun to make something and actually see it on the air, like your show here. And then I thought I drifted away from actually filmmaking and into, or it wasn't even a filmmaking. I mean, it wasn't like shooting with like a 16mm camera. It was all video kind of work.
Yeah.
And then I moved into cinema, what we call cinema studies now, but film studies. That was really where I was finding my home.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So I first got exposed to film in the 60s when I lived in Boston, and they would have all these Fellini movies.
Wow, yeah, sure.
It was quite fascinating. They had this place on Charles Street, this old church, and they had benches, didn't have pews. I guess they'd taken out the pews and benches, and they'd have Fellini movies. And who were some of those out there?
Oh my gosh, sure, Rossellini and Godard and Truffaut and Buñuel, and
a little gloomy.
Maybe even Polanski. I mean, his early.
Don't forget Bergman.
Bergman.
Yeah, on a good day, you got Bergman.
Yeah.
What's your take on all that in terms of the evolution of film? I mean, was that just a tangent that sort of disappeared when people got tired of it, or?
No, and it hasn't really disappeared. What I would say is the short version, or the shortest version, would be that these European, especially filmmakers, were taking this medium, of motion pictures in a place that American directors couldn't. There was still it was still heavily regulated, and in a way that, compared to their European counterparts, and then we didn't even talk about like people like Ozu or Satyajit Ray or Kurosawa, from India and Japan, and a lot of this international cinema that were doing things that American directors working in the studio system couldn't do. They couldn't kind of tell the adult, complex stories that the Fellinis of the world could in these early days.
But some of them, Ron, were like Knife in the Water was singularly boring, but you knew it was art. You know what I mean? So you sort of forgave it. but it was a knife in the water, and there was a sort of a story around it. I can't remember, but
Yeah,
it was
Polanski
exci-
was he had a
is
very
that him?
interesting worldview.
Yeah. So it was exciting to watch. And then they had that Italian actor, Marcello Mastroianni.
Yeah,
He
Mastroianni
was a
very-
labor organizer in Milan, and it's all black and white.
He was Fellini's go-to guy. I mean,
Yeah.
I think he saw Mastroianni as a kind of representation of himself.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you have even older directors like De Sica, who made the Italian
Vittorio De
neo-realist,
Sica.
like
One of the
Bicycle
giants.
Thieves being the most well-known. Yeah, they were just there weren't the pressures of the Hollywood system, right, where the film as commodity, right, that the only good film, I mean, for from that perspective, the economic perspective, is the only good film is the film that's profitable. Hell, art be damned.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It was really cut and dried in that way. A good film is one that makes money. A great film is one that makes more money. A bad film is one that doesn't make money. Doesn't matter who's involved with it. Doesn't matter the artistry. Doesn't matter anything else. And that perspective has always been a part of the Hollywood studio system for 100 years.
I think it still is.
It absolutely
Definitely,
is.
yeah.
Because places like Netflix, I mean, they borrow billions to make all these films. So they.
That's right.
But isn't the difference between socialism in Europe and capitalism in America? There's a whole different.
Well, winners and losers, I guess. Then
I also think
capitalism.
there were so many forbidden words, forbidden scenes that were part of the regulations that you're talking about here in America that weren't at all, verboten in Europe. So I think that made a big difference in terms of their ability to promote their artistry and get, life's issues across in a more effective way.
And I think that there was a belief that in Hollywood filmmaking to not challenge the audience, to not challenge the viewer, to make it
intellectually.
Yeah, to make it as digestible as possible for as many as possible, because you want everybody under the tent buying tickets. You mentioned Bergman. I mean, whose films were denser, and I mean that in the sense of just rich and deep and hard and challenging. Cries and Whispers. I mean.
Yeah.
They're the kind of films, when I watch those kind of films even today, the first thing I want to do is I want to come into it cold, and I want to see what, you hear a buzz, or a movie gets attention or nominations, which can mean something. And then you want to go into it as cold as possible without reading anything in advance. And I want to be exposed in that way. And then for ones that references things that I'm not too aware of, or I haven't brushed up on, or maybe things I haven't heard of at all, that I really feel like not having that knowledge is making this not as good an experience as it could be, not as full of an experience as it could be. And so then I start reading and try to go to some of the more film literate websites and places to read about these interesting works.
I assume that that's an approach that you convey to your students also.
I try my best. And they're I don't know. It's interesting. I think they all come from a different place. I mean, I would say when I first came into a class, just as I was talking about before, it didn't dawn on me that films had to be, could be challenging, and that could make them better and more interesting. So I don't hold it against them, but I try to at least bring everybody to some, if they start here or if they start here, I want to try and bring them up in some way. And it's great because a lot of times things that aren't necessarily films, I wouldn't say that I don't understand, but they're just not in the kind of genres that I really cater to. I go to search for, and that are very popular among students. So I get exposed to newer things that may be mainstream, but just not in my areas that I like.
Are you talking about horror movies?
I am talking about a lot of horror movies. Not my preferred. Not that I'm squeamish about violence or anything like that. It's not something I prefer if I have the choices among if I say, well, today I have 2 or 3 hours, now you need 3 hours for a lot of movies, a lot of good movies to watch something, am I going to go to a horror film?
Now, don't you think too that there are times when one wants that good feeling movie? If one is somewhat unhappy or depressed, or
Sure.
that they want to see
Something light.
something light, a comedy. What do they call them? Drama comedies or comedy
A
dramas.
rom-com, maybe
That's
a
it.
romantic comedy where
Rom-com,
they
is that-
they can rest assured that couple, no matter how much they bicker, they're going to end up together by the end of the film. Absolutely, and I mean, people use all kinds of media for mood
I mean,
mood
if
management.
if one only had a menu of Bergman, that could be pretty depressing.
There's
Yeah.
plenty
But-
of depressing stuff out there, for sure.
But he does challenge, and he makes you think about a lot of life's issues. Quite
In ways that you
quite-
may not want to, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what was Seventh Seal? Who did that?
Oh,
That's
that was
Bergman.
Bergman.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
With
that
Matt
was
Fonseca.
scary.
That was the first Bergman movie I ever saw.
Jesus.
Oh my gosh, I really was scared. Yeah.
Well, it was all set some castle out in the middle of Sweden, something like
Yeah,
that.
he's playing chess.
Playing
with
chess.
death.
That's it. With
But I
playing
think-
chess with
Fonseca.
death.
I think I saw that in Sweden when I was a student there.
Sure.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
it was a
Yeah.
huge movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I once had lunch with Bergman's director of cinematography.
Oh,
Really?
wow.
Was in Sweden.
Sven Nykvist, was it him?
I can't remember the name. If I heard it, I'd recommend. I remember right away because I had invested a modest amount in a film. It was a Sherwood Anderson play called Morning, Winter, and Night. Sherwood Anderson, as you may know, was a big writer for plays and whatever. So I got suckered into this syndicate. You invested. If you have a little money, you invested either a restaurant or a movie, right? That's the classic way to learn your first lessons
Yes.
about investing, which is, you don't want to do it. So we had to we had to have a rewrite, because we weren't getting anywhere. Brooke Shields was in it.
Wow.
Stuart Cliff Robertson
Oh,
was
okay.
the director.
Oh.
I think that was after, but it was
Huh.
you could just tell, you could feel the nails going into the coffin. You know what I mean? Like that. So they located someone knew Bergman's director of photography, and he lives in Sweden. So I said with my girlfriend at the time, why don't we go over, because we can have dinner with this guy and see what he'll do about the rewrite and all that sort of stuff. So we met up with him. And what's that island in Stockholm Harbor where they have a wonderful restaurant with huge? This is 100 years ago, but huge glass, and you can
Well,
see
is it-
Stockholm.
You're Gordon?
It might be. Yeah, it's
Leading Ur, where Carl Millis's house and garden are, and Sculpture Park.
that sounds familiar.
Leading Ur is a very popular
Yeah.
island, yeah.
So we went out there, and he'd got the script, and so I mean, I was just there to check a box that I've met Ingmar Bergman's cinematographer. Yeah, I did. I cared, but I only had 10,000 in the movie. I mean,
Oh,
it
wow.
was ridiculous.
And
but
this
that's
is
not
how many
much.
years ago?
Well, it was in the 70s. It was in the
Okay,
70s.
so you guys at home, you can all go on Google and
So
do the
Bill Ames
conversion.
frittered
Do the
away
conversion rate of
$30,000.
what was $10,000 in 1970 worth today in 2024
As an
dollars.
experience, though, it was sort of fun. So we're talking away, and the waiter comes and trying to get him to talk about. We didn't dare talk about Ingmar Bergman because probably figured he hated him, because this guy had gone out on his. You know how you got to be careful,
Yeah,
stuff like
sure.
that. So finally, he talks to us. He says, "Well, what are you going to do tomorrow?" I said, "Well, we're taking a train up to Norway to what's that? Begins with a T, where they did all the stuff in World War II.
Toon Bay?
No.
Tonberg?
No, it's a big town. It's not. It's. I'll think of it. So he said, and then he looked at us and he said, because then the subject, he's talking about the Midnight Sun. He said, "Do you know about the Midnight Sun?" It was just sort of Bergman-esque, So it's sort of cool. I would say I could. So he said, "Yeah, you should go up there, take the train up, and you will see that the sun never sets." And then he paused, and you will be at each other's throats.
Maybe he and Bergman got along just fine.
Yeah. They probably did, but I didn't want to.
Sure.
He's too name droppy, and stuff like that. So we stayed away from that. The EB words, So.
Gotcha.
But tell us, you must have met some guys and girls who've done some interesting things in the film world.
I mean, it's been back when I was still a student, so it would have been the late '90s. I met the Farrelly brothers.
Oh yeah.
When they were making "There's Something About Mary."
Yeah. Where are they from? Minnesota?
No, they're from Rhode Island.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. And they, I had friends who were working for them as producer, and so they were shooting down in Miami. It was break time in Syracuse in February. He's like, my friend said, you should come down, hang out, see the set, meet the guys. So I was there, and I was there for about 4 days, 4 nights. They were doing a lot of night shooting.
Yeah.
So it was, the call was probably at like 8 or 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Going till about 4.
Wow.
3 or 4 in the morning. Something like that.
I saw that film, Something About Mary. It did very well.
It did extremely well. I mean, it kind of, they said, it's talked about as ushering in a kind of, gross out comedy.
Yeah,
because there's the sight gags.
There's one particular one in there, right?
There's a couple.
There's a couple of sort of on the real edgy.
They were, and then it just opened the door. It opened the floodgates because why? Not because it was so edgy, really, but because they said, "Oh, you could do this and make money," because that was financially, it was one of many of their. I mean, all the stuff with Jim Carrey and the Dumb and Dumber, and all of that, all of these. I mean, blockbuster films.
Yeah,
I'm sure that their lifetime box offices, into the billions. They've made a lot of movies.
They still make them to this day, or are they retired?
They
must be in their 80s.
No, they're not that old. They're probably in their 60s. Yeah. I think the last that I remember, I know that they're both involved more with TV, and that's not back then. 20, 30 years ago, you didn't make that jump. That was seen as a step down, going from the movie industry to like television. It was like looked down upon, like, oh, you're torpedoing your career. Yeah. And of course now, this. I mean, I don't know. Talk about being ushered in maybe by The Sopranos, maybe other shows like it, Breaking Bad. Now A-list talent from Hollywood. Some of your biggest stars are happy working in this medium. We're doing TV shows, doing that deeper dive into something that's not ultimately going to be a 2 or 3 hour, right? I mean, that they might give 2 months of their life to work on a film. Yeah. Instead, doing the deep dive where you're kind of coming to a series where you're doing 20, 30 hours of content and you're more involved, and it's a longer term commitment, and we're in this kind of new golden age.
The content required is huge. I mean, Netflix has got to feed the monster. They all do.
They all do.
Come up with new stuff. Now, Priscilla's son is one of the established producers on Netflix. Isn't that right?
Well, he became established because he produced a Netflix movie about the Motley Crue band of the 80s. It's called The Dirt.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it?
You'd remember it, Ron.
I know
the opening.
I know of it. I'm not sure if I've seen that one.
Okay, well, that established Eric. I mean, until that time he was struggling, but he never gave up on his dream. And it was 22 years when he produced that movie. It took him 10 years to do it. Wow. But now I was just thinking, he has a couple of television series that he's working on. But he's, his first love is film. But in some sense, series are episodes in a long film.
That's right.
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
So it's very appealing to people who've been involved in film, like my son
it's all scripting
Eric.
And shooting and editing. It's all the same.
Yeah.
Basic exercise.
The tools of the trade are identical.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of scope, right? Yeah. I mean, doing something for a couple of hours versus 10, let's say, right? A season.
Well, I think since Netflix and Amazon Prime and now Apple and other groups, TV is in competition with these companies. And so, you see, I think it's good for television because it's brought up the quality of the programs.
But it's TV, but it's Netflix basically.
Yes, right.
I mean, it goes right to Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that those distinctions aren't even. They're not. People don't make them necessarily anymore. I mean, there are some differences. I mean, you can do things. We come back to that our original discussion about the '60s, because again, in America, right, you have that the early '60s, late '50s, you have these directors, foreign directors, taking chances, doing things that could never pass muster here. And then the mid '60s, the dam starts to break. By '68, we have a rating system now. So it says to Hollywood, and it's run by Hollywood. I mean, it's their own self-monitoring system of ratings, but it says, make your movie, we'll put it in the right category. You want to deal with adult things, we'll put it in the adult category. You want to do something that's for the whole family, we'll put it in the category that's appropriate for all families. And we have a rating system. So it's not like these are prohibitions, you can't do that, you can't do this. Instead, we segued to, make your movie, and we will put it in the appropriate category. You may have arguments about the category it goes in, but it was a real kind of shift in how. And then starting in movies like Bonnie and Clyde, '67 is a really touchstone year. '68 is when the ratings started. I think it was '68. So right around there. But you have Bonnie and Clyde come out. You have, Midnight Cowboy, rated X, won Best Picture.
Yeah.
One Best Picture, right? So then, you have, right, these kind of mainstream movies that are dealing with adult stories, adult content, and not meant for 12, 13-year-olds.
Don't forget The Graduate.
The Graduate. That's right. That's right.
That was a huge success, that movie.
That was.
What's interesting today in the 2024, that PG, I'm amazed at what is put in the PG category. I mean, violence and some sex. I mean, really, what's happening? What do you think?
It's all a French model. I mean, France has always been way ahead of us, right?
Well, it depends on the content. You could argue that we're the opposite, whereas they are much more permissive in terms of what could we call it, like romantic content, and more averse to allowing extreme violence into kind of movies classified for everyone or for more of the audience. Here we're the opposite. You can have wall-to-wall violence as long as it's not overly bloody.
That's right.
It's fine, but there are still some pretty tighter restrictions on, body parts being shown and that kind of content.
So do you think that has direct relationship with the proliferation of these video games with everybody shooting everyone? That violence.
I've never thought of it in that context. I come back to the idea that it's good business.
Okay, well, my 12-year-old grandson, he just loves the shoot 'em uppers. I mean, I was forced to give him 2 video games about World War II for Christmas.
Grand Theft Auto. That's a big one.
Yes. I mean, we should concede that the video game industry is much bigger than the movie industry in terms of revenue.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
it's huge.
It is. I mean, it's just, and the time spent. If you look at that as consumers, we have 2 commodities: our money and our time, and there's no comparison in time with video game.
Yeah. So I want to purge my soul of another subject, which is you taught the history of film, right? Obviously.
I have.
One of your many courses.
I have.
So my favorite film, and just about everybody else's favorite film, or one of the top favorite films, is Pulp Fiction, right?
Okay. I thought you were going way back history.
No.
Okay.
Well,
so
the
90s. The 90s.
I mean, I don't know how he came up with that 4 separate stories and integrated them, but that must have broken some ground, I would think, in terms of. Bruce Willis. Well, Bruce Willis, obviously. And
I guess what is interesting is that it, despite all of its accolades and all the praise, and it was, I don't know of a movie, you know, of the last few decades that spawned so much imitation, so many, and of course a lot of the imitators, they did not have the same juice that Quentin Tarantino did.
Yeah.
They couldn't bring it like he could. However, is again won lots of awards, but internationally, it didn't make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Internationally,
Really?
and that's because it's so tied up. There's violence, yes, and that's easy. That travels well. But there's so much reliance on talking and understanding American idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms, and that does not travel well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Compared to, like, again, I mean, and I can bring it back to, you know, why ratings work the way they do so well. And I've never thought about video games about it that way, but they have a rating system too. But the thing that's, I think, noteworthy is that Hollywood figured out that PG-13 is the money rating. Why? Because no one is prohibited from buying a ticket for a PG-13 film. There's not like someone at the door saying, "Do you have your ID proving that you're 13, little boy?"
Yeah.
And everybody's welcome into the theater. Everyone can buy a ticket, or even if we look at it today, like watch it all. That's why almost all of your franchises, the Marvel Universe, Star Wars, Harry Potter, all PG-13. And PG-13 promises a little bit more in terms of adult content than PG. Yet it's not restrictive, so everybody gets in. And yearly, more R-rated movies are released each year, but PG-13 generates far more revenue each year. Most, just about every year. This year was interesting, last year, 23, because of Oppenheimer being such a hit. And Barbie, for that matter, but that's not R-rated.
And Taylor Swift's, that's a blockbuster.
Yep. I mean,
but getting back to Pulp Fiction, my favorite scene is Uma Thurman and John Travolta.
The dancing?
Yes, the big boys. Uma Thurman's the wife or the girlfriend of the big mob boss, right?
That's right.
And
Marcellus.
Yeah,
Wallace.
and Travolta has to be very careful because she might be putting the moves on him.
Yes,
and
it doesn't end up well for him.
It doesn't, but
face it.
It's an extraordinary. Yeah, it's an extraordinary film, I thought. In terms of,
it is. I think the thing that's most impressive is how he has produced these nonlinear narratives.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. That, you know, he does not worry about chronology. He does, you know, it doesn't have, his films are never A, B, C, D to Z. It's always, you know, you could start off with W, and then you could be an A in terms of a timeline. And, you know, he's a firm believer that the audience will follow you if they trust you and they think that you're competent and that they're in, you know, they're in good hands. They'll follow you, even if things don't make sense, right? Because Travolta dies in the movie. Spoiler alert: 30 years ago. Hey,
he dies
in Pulp Fiction. He gets shot while in the bathroom.
Oh, does he?
But like later in the film, he's alive again.
Oh, yeah.
Right, because chronology is not important to Quentin Tarantino. In fact, he goes out of his way to defy chronology. And you know, before he directed that, he did Reservoir Dogs, which was the one that really made a splash. And it was a gritty kind of noir-ish to a caper film, you know, caper gone bad, which has been done forever. I mean, Kubrick did a great one with The Killers way back in the 50s with Sterling Hayden. And, you know, so it goes way back. And he did it. And again, this nonlinearity and the reliance on the spoken word, dialogue is precious to him, Tarantino.
It does make the point that, you know, it's a movie within a movie type of thing.
Yeah.
And if you get some, and plus it helps to have stars like Samuel L. Jackson. But that scene in the opening with the cheeseburger, and then they go in and quote the Bible and shoot those guys.
So Ron,
yes.
What are your challenges right now at Stonehill, and what are your aspirations? How do you see the future? How would you like to create the future?
Ooh, Okay, let's see. I think there is a, I mean, and this is not exclusive to 18 to 22-year-old young adults. There's a battle with technology going on with screens, in that um, they serve as a very good distraction in many ways. And, you know, when you have a job to do, which I think it's not inappropriate for a student to think of being attentive and present, in the sense of not just physically present, but emotionally, intellectually present for a couple of hours a week in a classroom, is a job. That's your job, to be there, to be part of it, to be open to what's going on, to, you know, to argue, not in a combative way, but argue with whomever if you have a point and you think that it's worth hearing and contributing to the dialogue. And I think that, you know, we allow ourselves to just let our screens take us out of it. And I don't restrict that to young adults. I believe I think it's everywhere. I see it all the time. I see it everywhere. People my age, people their age, people older, little children. It's just here. Just have it, just be engaged with your screen to the detriment of the life going on around you. And I think it serves the purposes of those people who sell content or create content and sell ad space and occupy our eyes and our mind in those moments. And certainly the Apples of the world that create these devices, it's all in their best interest to keep us on there for hours, but
So
it may not be our own best interest.
Yeah. Do you tell your students to turn off their phones?
No, but I did for a while, until it just got to, the best way I can describe it is to, you know, grammar school-ish, like, you know, Joe, put your phone away. And he's like, you know, and it's just like, it got to be, I don't want to waste the time of the students who are there and who are present by having to tell people repeatedly to put their devices away. So I actually tried something brand new for me this semester. So as we're taping this, we're barely a month into it. And I said, for laptops and tablets, which, you know, is pretty important. Like, there's time now where every student, you know, we're Stonehill's small class, not 200 or 300 person lecture halls, but in 25 students, 23 of them will not be taking any kind of notes the conventional way. They'll have a laptop. And 21 of them are not doing anything class related on that laptop. So I tried something new this semester, and so far, again, I feel like it's an experiment in progress. I said that laptops and tablets aren't allowed.
Oh.
Take your notes the old-fashioned way, and if you have you know, we call them like letters of accommodation, right, for students who have certain needs that need to be met, like they can't, you know, they couldn't keep up writing notes. They need to be working on a tablet or a computer, or so I said, well, if you have a letter of accommodation, or if you want to use your laptop in class or your tablet, I want you to put in writing. I want you to write me a note and tell me why. Just tell me why you need to use your laptop or tablet, and abide by the rules that if you're not using it for class, I can call you out on it, and I will. And let's see how it goes. And so far, a month in, it's been, from my perspective, good. The engagement level has been way up. Students are, you know, I'm getting all, you know, there's always a few who just don't like to talk in class, but in general, the critical mass of that class now, they're involved. Different weeks, different people, but, and I feel that that is a success. We'll see as things get more ramped up and graded stuff starts happening and things like that, but I think it's promising. It's something I'm going to, I mean, there are some classes you couldn't do it. That having you know, there are some classes that occur in computer labs, right? So you have a whole setup in front of you because you need it. You need it to do what needs to be done in that class. But for the things I teach, it's not absolutely necessary. And we'll see how it goes. But if it does go what I consider well, and the students do, based on, I don't know, their results, how well they do they do better because they're more present, not distracted? we'll see.
Mhm.
And
So-
I can talk to my colleagues about it.
Tell me, what is your favorite class to teach, and what is the favorite class of your students, do you surmise?
Ooh. Well, they're both film classes because I do teach other media-driven courses that aren't film-specific. But my favorite class is the one I'm teaching now, which is kind of an introduction to film. It's not entirely dissimilar to the class I stepped foot in as a 19-year-old. It's not. It's essentially aesthetics of film, or film as art. So we look at how, you know, the different aspects of the filmmaking process contribute to storytelling, creating, making meaning, and that, you know, nothing in a film really is an accident. It's all stuff that has to be pre-planned, and if it happens by chance, it still has to be refined before it ever gets seen by an audience. So we take that working approach, and I try to incorporate elements of film history in these discussions, or elements related to, you know, different genres and all kinds of things. So, you know, I mean, it's fresh in my mind because yesterday we met and we did a film, one of my favorites, called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. It's a French film directed by an American, actually a painter named Julian Schnabel. He's one of these New York guys who's very eccentric and quirky, and he does these canvases that are enormous and gets millions and millions of dollars for them. But he's made a few films, and this film is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's based on a true story about a man who works for French Vogue and suffers a massive, massive stroke that leaves him, ultimately, by the 10-minute mark of the movie, we realize that it leaves him with control of one eye. That's it. Can't move, can't speak, in fact, in the first few minutes, has his other eye sewn shut. And he has one eye, but his faculties are completely fine. And he, before he dies, writes a book. And that book is what the movie is based on. And it's truly an extraordinary, extraordinary film. And the reception yesterday, when we talked about it in class, was great. So I'm hopeful. Max von Sydow plays his father in the film. So, you know, we even got a little bit of that. So I get to talk about his history a little bit as an actor and everything he's done. So that gets me very energized.
Did Max von Sydow speak French in that movie?
Yes.
He did.
Yes. And it's, again, that energizes me a great deal. But I think the class that students seem to respond to best is another film class I do on what was called New Hollywood Cinema of the time, but it's 1967 to 1976 American cinema. The Graduate, we cover that. We start with Bonnie and Clyde, we end with Taxi Driver, and there's about a dozen films by many of the greats.
Now, do you show those films in class, or are they expected to watch them?
They have to watch them on their own.
On their own.
And most of them, I would say, are seeing them on a laptop, most likely. That's where they see them, and that's just an artifact of where we are. It would be nearly impossible to arrange a screening, because again, they're 2 plus hours, and then there'd be no time to talk about them.
Have the students rated those movies?
Well, I don't ask them for a rating, but at the end of the semester, I'll do a quick little 2-question thing for each film that we focus on. Say, like, you know, in your opinion, was this film, did it belong in this class? Like, was it helping illustrate concepts and things that we're trying to do? And, you know, they can just check a box and they can leave a comment. And they say, did you like this movie? And they can do the same thing. I liked it a lot, liked it a little, I didn't really like it, and they can leave a comment. But I mean, you know, the liking part is, I mean, you know, do you like Chinatown? I love Chinatown, but it's so depressing. I mean, the ending it's one of the most bleak endings, and it's also one of the best written scripts in the history of cinema. Right? But it's not fun. Bonnie and Clyde, they get destroyed at the end of the movie. It's so graphic For that, for 1967, it's remarkably graphic. It was a seed change in terms of content and film violence, but it was done that way on purpose. The director wanted to make a message that, you know, this is more of an execution than an apprehension at the end, and it was brutal, and he tried to convey that. There's no sense of triumph and like law and order winning out, you know, at the end of that film, and that was the goal. That was the director's intent. In fact, you mentioned, you know, Godard, and, no, Truffaut, I think. They approached him to do it first. And
Day for Night.
Day for Night, great movie.
One of the great movies.
Mid-70s, yes. So I'm strictly Hollywood, but
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I mean, it's I think that they respond to them very well, though. They're eye-opening. Some of the content is very challenging, and you know, I have to kind of give them a heads up and say, like, you know, there are some. I showed Harold and Maude, which is one of my personal favorites. Right, it's a dark comedy. Hal Ashby, and you know, it uses, if you've seen it, you know, Harold is a kind of very wealthy child whose father has passed away, and he is constantly trying to get his mother's attention by staging these elaborate suicides. And they look, you know, because it's Hollywood and a Hollywood movie, you know, he immolates himself, he hangs himself, and it all is super convincing looking and great, but then it's all a joke. It's all played for laughs because his mother just eventually starts ignoring him. She's like, "Oh, Harold, please, not again," right? As he like pretends to blow his brains out and stuff. And I had a student who's like, you know, I said, this film deals with suicide in a kind of, it's done in a comic way, but it is a major element of the scene, of the film. And you know, if that is something that you find difficult, go online, look it up, read about it. If you don't think you can work with this film, let me know. And I had one student who did, and we found a substitute for her. And you know, no harm, no foul. It was fine.
Well, you're a great professor.
Well, you know, it's not my job. These films can be traumatizing, but it's not my job to traumatize intentionally, to traumatize my students. So I think it works out. It works out. They're not, you know, it's not, it's something that I've done though since day one. I've always done that since my first days of teaching. I mean, I first taught a class 30 years ago before I was at Stonehill, before I finished my PhD. I had a master's degree, taught at Rhode Island College. The same class I had taken, not that different than the one I was just describing, not the 70s, but the other one. And I've always said that. I've always said, you know, there's some content here. Might want to give you a heads up. I use Hearts of Darkness, which is the documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now, directed by Eleanor Coppola, made it. And there's nothing really bad in it, except they film a religious animal sacrifice, a religious ceremony in the Philippines. And it's graphic. And it takes up maybe 10 seconds of the movie. So I've always given my students, when I use that film, a heads up. Say, you know, this happens. You'll know when it's coming. You can just kind of don't look at it.
Close your eyes.
Just don't watch it, and you'll, you know, it's just a brief moment on screen, and it's not even made up. It's not something, you know, made up for the camera. This is something that was actual. So, you know, it's a cultural thing. Like in that culture, this is perfectly acceptable to do this way. So, and I mean, I have no problem with that. I think we can still get to the points that we're trying to get to. And that's at the end of the day, that's what I'm hoping for. So that 70s class was very popular. And I think that was very eye-opening, because they think, well, for them, 70s is ancient. It's 50 years ago.
Oh,
and wow, the content is pretty intense. Pretty intense. So I think that that's something that is eye-opening.
What do you enjoy most about your teaching profession?
Working with students. I mean, I chose Stonehill because it gave me the opportunity to work with undergraduates. And that part of the job has really never let me down.
Have you found that any of them moved to Hollywood and try out to
Didn't they-
be a success.
Doesn't Stonehill have an apartment out there, or used to?
We did have a program out there, and it hasn't come back since COVID.
Yeah.
We had in the, I want to say at this time in 2020, we had about, I want to say maybe 15 students out there in LA,
Yeah.
and they all had to come home.
They had
And-
internships, right?
yeah,
Type of thing? So you
yeah.
arranged the internship for them, and
No,
they got it.
we
on their
help,
own?
but they have to find them.
Oh, so was it a summer job or
No, it was
Yeah.
during
during the year?
the regular semester.
Now, my son went to Ithaca College, and he was a film major in the communications department. And they offered to all those students one semester in LA where they would have classes 2 days a week and intern for 3 days a week. And Ithaca found the positions, and my son was fortunate to end up on the Warner Brothers lot with Silver Pictures, Joel Silver,
Sure.
yeah, and Mel Gibson and Danny Glover were making Lethal Weapon 4 at the time.
Mm.
That goes back. And so Eric learned the business. He was there for 11 years.
Wow.
And so he really learned the
great.
business. Yeah.
So Ron, on the same note of your teaching these courses, I was thinking as you were talking that the idea of giving your students an exercise to write a script for like a 10-page or 15-page script for a movie, or maybe you call it a treatment, I don't know.
Maybe, or a scene. You could write a scene. Sometimes just writing a scene is a lot more challenging than you might think.
But the reason I think this might be interesting is because of AI and chat. I mean, you can vet ideas on chat, whatever. You got to make a judgment, of course, at the end of the day.
Right.
But the whole idea of writing fiction has just changed, like 100%.
Everything has, absolutely. And I will be the first to admit that, right now, there's some uncomfortable footing around AI and its role in the student experience from my perspective.
Well, help us with that.
Well, you worry about students just kind of saying, hey, I don't have to do anything, really. Any work that I generate, I can just go to AI.
Yeah.
And there's debates, it's early for this technology in this context. So there are debates of like, well, we can't stop it. How do we embrace it? How do we incorporate it? And it could be in the form of something like you're saying, like, using AI generated material for brainstorming.
Yeah.
Seems perfectly fine.
And some context.
But but somewhere along the line, it's got to be yours.
Well, I would think that this revives the idea of giving tests, right? Because if you give people tests, there's no AI to help them out. So come up with a one-page treatment or something. I mean, that'd see if they got the chops.
This is true. Then I have to have the chops to evaluate it, of course.
But there's no AI in there. I mean, what have you learned from AI? In other words, how robust is your thinking? Because, it's the difference between writing a poem and a short story. A poem is much tougher because it's shorter.
That's true.
You can't.
You have every word must count.
My
times
son,
3.
During COVID, my son started writing screenplays. And when he was home visiting me over Christmas, he showed me how AI can work. And he said, so he fed in information and told, to write an introductory page to a short story. And I couldn't believe how wonderful it was. Now, in my former life, I taught creative writing. So I was amazed at how beautifully written this, little one-page introduction. It was just amazing. I couldn't believe it. And I would have given it an A+.
Yeah. I mean, the things that are, because, what I do, one of the things I do in this class I'm teaching now with the films like that Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Next week we're doing a film called Children of Men. Clive Owen was in it. And I have weekly, like I just say, just one page. Here's a little question for you to think about with this film. Just give me one page. Right. And, students rate this. So you get, it helps me develop a sense on a weekly basis. So by the time they take a midterm exam in a couple of weeks, I've already read 5 things from them.
Yeah.
So I have some baseline sense of how they write. But the chilling part of AI is that you can also say, well, write this in the form how a high school student would write it. So you can kind of, it will take on the persona of
Absolutely
what you're asking, so that you wouldn't just produce something A+ work when, oh geez, I've been handing in kind of maybe B work, and now I'm going to come in with the A+.
Don't make this too good.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So tell us about the writers' strike.
Before that, I have to just insert one thing. My son has never used A1 in his screenwriting. Everything is original, and because he's so creative. And
well, we'll just see how it goes 2 or 3 years from now. I mean, it's
one never knows.
It's
if
true.
you use it as, so what were the writers? I can think of the most obvious things, but
Oh, geez, the writer's strike. I'm assuming that a lot of it comes down to residuals. I think that was a big part. My recollection of it was 2 things. One was about AI and the role that would play, but also is how, and that actors were especially concerned with that, and I think it's why it took longer for their deal to be made. Is like, how are you going to use my voice, my likeness, if you have, unlimited, unfettered use of it, you being the studio. But the alternative, the other side with what the writers might be concerned with, is the idea of, I think it was more about residual payments, right?
I guess that's right.
Because
Follow the money.
as everything goes with streaming now, so much more. And again, last year was exceptional in that 2 franchise films were the big box office films, Barbie and Oppenheimer. I mean, that is so against the tide of the last 2 decades to have 2 movies that were original. Like, they didn't come from something out there already, something we've seen, a remake, a sequel, the 7th sequel, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It was remarkable. I mean, you could, maybe go back to something like Titanic that made over $1 billion on its own. That was something so original. Maybe Avatar, something so original. Of course, now then it gets put into the machine, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but still, these are, it's pretty remarkable that happened last year.
Well, Ron, we're out of time, and I personally want to thank you so much. You have been fascinating and so intriguing with all of your stories and your insights into film. You are an amazing professor, and Stonehill is so fortunate to have you. Bill, you want to
It's very
close?
kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great to get see you again, Ron, and a lot of happy memories way back, getting the film festival competition underway. And, we hope maybe you could come back, do another show. We try to do one a month. And you being
don't be a stranger, Bill. Reach out. Let me know.
Well, we
absolutely
can come up with some content for a show that is interesting for you. Maybe something like the AI implications of AI.
Okay, so we're going to close for now, and we thank the audience for watching. We thank Ron Leone and my co-anchor here, Bill Ames, and we hope you've enjoyed the program. Until next month, be well.